Okay, guys, so it's on to the humoral response. And this one, I want you to remember B cells. Okay, now B cells, okay, come in different varieties as well. Okay, a lot of times we call them plasma B cells, or we call them suppressor B cells, memory B cells. But all in all B cells are like, remember, like our Air Force. They're going to produce a weapon of some sort. And that weapon of choice is the antibody. Okay. So B cells, they're not going to do it themselves. Instead, they're going to use a weapon. Now, real quick, we'll look at one of the worksheets that you had that I showed you in the last video. Okay. That compared T cells and B cells. Okay. And B cells, trying to get this to focus a little bit better. It's not focusing so much, but you have these worksheets. B cells have to be activated by the helper T cells. Remember that general in charge? So B cells might have these antigens. Okay, they've recognized the bad guy, but they're not activated yet. It takes a helper T cell to activate the B cells. So think of that general in charge. Not only is he in charge of other Marines just like him, but he's going to have to alert the Air Force. Okay, and B cells, they're going to produce what we call a humoral response, which means they're going to make antibodies. Okay, and you have that other worksheet too that's going to go into a lot more detail than even my video is. It's going to talk about clonal selection, which is basically when B cells reproduce, they can make some memory cells, they can make some plasma cells. What will they go on to do? And so we'll talk about each of those types of B cells. Okay, and yep. So let's go on. Okay. Oh, one more thing I want to mention on the back of this are the antibodies, and we'll talk about how antibodies bind to the antigen too. All right. So let's go on to our B cells, our humoral response. Okay. So now, again, we're in the specific immune response. That's that third line of defense. Okay, the specific immune response, but we're not talking about the cellular response this time. We're talking about the humoral response. And when it comes to B cells, there's basically three types that we want to mention. First, there's the plasma B cells. Okay, those are the ones that are actually going to be the ones making antibodies. Okay, these are the big makers of antibodies. So when we say that they're activated, it's usually the plasma B cells that are actually activated into making lots and lots of antibodies. And I think it's something like over 200,000 antibodies per second can be produced by these cells. So these cells are like mad good at their job. Okay. Well, also B cells will divide. Lots of them will divide to also make memory B cells. And just like the memory T cells, the memory B cells are going to remember what the infection's like. They're going to remember how to make those antibodies also. Okay, so memory B cells are going to be very important in your long-term immunity. So let's say important in long-term immunity. Okay, because when we talk about immunity, we don't talk about actually like when you're sick in your immune system. We're actually talking about when you're not sick and your immune system is kind of like on high alert waiting for something bad to come along. So that true immunity is something you build up over time. Okay, and then finally, we're going to mention some suppressor B cells out there too. So there are some suppressors out there too. And just like the suppressor T cells, the suppressor B cells will stop antibody production. Antibody production. Okay. Now, all of this, we got to say, all of this is activated by the T cell. Activated by, not any T cell, helper T cell. Okay, and that's like very important. I'm going to put a box around that and say that that's very important to remember, that all these B cells are activated by that helper T cell, the general in charge. Okay, now we need to go into a little more detail about this weapon of choice, the antibody. Okay, And the antibody, we always say it's a Y-shaped protein. Well, like if you actually looked at its, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, that's the globs on globs. Okay, you will notice these globs on globs actually form like a Y shape. Okay, so we say Y-shaped proteins. But what do these Y-shaped proteins do? And we're going to call them kind of like unsung heroes, but unsung heroes with keys, okay? They have a certain key, and those keys will like latch on to an antigen, but they've been built, they've been made, this key has been made to fit perfectly like a puzzle piece on that. And they actually latch onto the things in a couple of different ways. Okay. One way, they do a couple of different things. Y-shaped proteins that do a couple of different things. First one is this crazy word called opsonins. Opsonins are identifiers. Identify. Okay, so when they're building these antibodies have this protein on them that's going to tag these antigens for destruction. So opsins are like the first thing that's kind of important when we talk about antibodies. The second thing, okay, are the oh gosh, what is the word? It's escaping my mind right now. They're the neutralizers. Thank you, Bonnie's brain, for remembering that. The neutralizers. Neutralizers are really the most common. And I kind of call them like handcuffs. Okay, like handcuffs. Here, what these Y-shaped proteins or these antibodies will do, so if this is like the antigen, this is the bad guy, the Y-shaped proteins like kind of all surround him and neutralize him, making him unable to attach to a host cell and do the damage. Okay. Now, the Y-shaped proteins or the antibodies also do one other thing. They do this thing, what we call agglutinate. Agglutins. 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 Okay, this is kind of like neutralizers, but instead what happens is you might have one and an antibody attaches to it, and then it kind of coagulates with another antigen and another antibody, and you get this clump, okay? And the antibodies just kind of surround a clump. Okay, so I want you to think clumps with this. Okay, so that's our antibodies. And again, the B cells will make these antibodies, these Y-shaped proteins, and then those antibodies will go out and they'll identify them, the antigen. Those are the opsonins, okay, or the neutralizers, which will handcuff one single one, or the agglutins, which will clump a bunch of them together, okay? And all this is to stop that antigen from like causing harm or entering into any of your host cells. All right. And that's it for the humoral response. There's definitely more details that we could go into with this. Oh, one such thing. Let me not forget is formation. B cells are also formed in the bone marrow. Again, thank your femur out there, the bone marrow. But they don't go on, sorry about that sloppiness there. They don't go on to the T cell to learn. Once they're formed in the bone marrow, they go directly to the lymph gland and then move directly to lymph glands. And it's in there, and when an antigen comes along, that the B cell kind of learns its job and then gets activated, of course, by the helper T cell. Okay, so, and I know a lot of times people say T cell, thymus gland first, B cell, bone marrow. But then people forget that the T cell also starts out in the bone marrow. All blood starts out in the bone marrow, even the macrophages, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, natural killers, mast cells, all of those things, dendritic cells. All of those things start out as, blood. These stem cells that give rise to all your blood cells start out in the bone marrow and then, develop there. But then where they go from there depends on their jobs. If they're going to be a red blood cell or a white blood cell, and the many types of white blood cells that we talked about here today. Okay. And actually B cells don't get their name from B. I think it was from like some bursa, which are little sacs that are near your joints that are kind of cushiony sacs. And I can't even remember where it was like discovered first, but they were discovered in these bursa cells. And that's where the B actually came from. Everybody thinks it comes from bone marrow, but it doesn't. Okay. So that's it for the humoral response. Those are the B cells. And like I said, they're like the Air Force. They're not going to get down on the ground like the Marines do and do the fighting. Instead, they're going to produce their weapon of choice, which happens to be the antibodies. And those antibodies are going to identify, neutralize, and clump them all together. Okay? And that's it for that humoral response. The next thing I want to talk about is immunity in general and when our immune systems go wrong.